Meta Quest 3 will not have eye tracking. In this video, I'm going to talk about why. I briefly touched on this in a previous video talking about Quest 3's cost, but a lot of people all over social media are saying that not having eye tracking is a mistake. So let's go over the reasons why I disagree and what I believe Meta's thought process is. Then later, we'll go over what Quest 3 owners will be missing out on without eye tracking and why I don't think it's that big of a deal unless you're into very specific content. By the way, I've heard all your comments about how fast I speak on these videos. I'm naturally a fast talker and I'm going to work on that. Let me know how I'm doing down in the comments. The main reason I feel Meta passed on eye tracking for Quest 3 is it's very expensive. Not just in terms of money, but we'll talk about money first. After the lukewarm reception to the Quest Pro, in part because of its $1,500 retail price, Meta likely put a premium on keeping the next consumer headset reasonably priced. If you ever had to budget for anything, you understand that sometimes you have to make compromises to stay out of the red. There's a reason that eye tracking has always been in enterprise tier VR headsets with enterprise tier level pricing. Here's just a few of the headsets that have eye tracking natively built in and how much they cost. Starting at the top, we got the Varo XR3 at $6,495, the Varo VR3 at $3,645, the Pimax Crystal at $1,599, the Quest Pro initially at $1,500, now down to $1,000. HTC Vive Focus 3 starts at $1,300, plus another $250 for the eye tracking accessory. The Enterprise Edition Pico 4 will run you $977, plus importing costs if you live in North America like I do. Finally, at the bottom, you have PSVR 2 at $550, assuming you already own a PS5. If, like me, you don't, then fork over another $400+ for that console. Oh, and if you want eye tracking for your shiny new HTC Vive XR Elite that you already paid $1,100 for, then you'll have to wait for that paid add-on coming soon. If you don't believe me, here's Meta's Andrew Bosworth also explaining this.
It's going to be a little while. It's going to be years. The reason is simple. All those extra cameras and the compute power required to actually do the face geometry and the recognition just has a lot of trade-offs with it. And one of the main trade-offs is cost.
So if you're Meta and you're emphasizing other things like the pancake lenses, color pass-through with the depth sensor we didn't get in Quest Pro, and the new XR2 Gen 2 chip for better performance and processing power, by the way I did a video on that chip that I linked down in the description, then something had to give if you wanted to keep that headset at an accessible price, to quote Mark Zuckerberg.
But Mike, what about the PlayStation VR 2? It's only $550. That's still cheaper than those other headsets.
For those of you pointing to PSVR 2 having eye tracking at $550, remember it is not a standalone headset like a Quest. Like I said earlier, it's powered by a $400+ PlayStation 5, meaning you're at that Quest Pro level price range. So the RAM, CPU, and GPU are not contained in the PSVR 2, that's all in your PS5, and your PSVR 2 is essentially a very, very fancy monitor. Earlier I said eye tracking was expensive in more ways than one. The other cost is resources. Let's talk about the Quest Pro. The Quest Pro has a slightly better chip and more RAM than the Quest 2, but because Meta did not release it with a suite of apps specifically built for it, a major mistake they made I really need to do a separate video on, every app Quest Pro is running was built and optimized for the slightly less powerful Quest 2. So those upgrades that make it slightly better than Quest 2 are basically free to handle other tasks, namely processing the eye tracking. Eye tracking is done with infrared cameras that are tracking the location of your pupils, basically by tracing the darkness of the color, contrasting with the sclera, the white part of your eye. Well, something has to process that data. This is what that extra power Quest Pro has over Quest 2 is doing. Otherwise, it's just running an app built for Quest 2.
But Mike, you did a whole video saying Quest 3 would be twice as powerful as Quest 2, so it can handle the extra processing, right?
Sure it can. However, there's a trade-off for that. Eating up those resources to handle eye tracking means that the new chip has less resources for other things, namely better graphics and ultimately bigger games. Every bit of processing on any PC has a resource cost, and since Quest 3 will most likely be underclocked like every other Meta headset, are you willing to trade eye tracking for better graphics and bigger games, and are you willing to pay hundreds of dollars more for it? If so, honestly, Quest 3 may not be the headset for you. So now that we covered the cost, what are we missing out on? If you're someone who enjoys things like eye, face, and body tracking and apps like VR Chat, you are likely better off looking at any of the other headsets I mentioned earlier, except the PSVR 2, which at the time of this video does not support body or face trackers yet. For VR users into more traditional gaming, let's look at some of the examples PSVR 2 has offered us. Eye tracking is only useful if the developers take advantage of it. Horizon Call of the Mountain has optional eye-tracked aim assist and eye-tracked menu navigation. Switchback VR has an entire section of the game where the monsters in the room with you move every time you blink. Admittedly, that's pretty terrifying and very cool. Firewall Ultra, releasing later this year, lets you switch weapons with your eyes. You can get into a staring contest with Quill and Moss. Finally, the game Before Your Eyes is the only game to my knowledge entirely built around eye tracking. I asked around in some discords I'm in, and the consensus was Call of the Mountain felt like the best use of eye tracking. PSVR 2 currently has somewhere around 50 games at the time of this video, so that's a fairly small list of games integrating eye tracking into the gameplay, and the Moss example is a bit of a stretch by that definition. The other thing is dynamic foveated rendering. Foveated rendering is when the pixels in a specific area are fully rendered and everything around it is less rendered. This is a technique to improve performance because every pixel is not being fully rendered. The Quest 2 has fixed foveated rendering, where a specific spot is rendered fully and the area around it is not. Dynamic foveated rendering utilizes the eye tracking, so wherever your eyes are looking is where the pixels are fully rendered, and that shifts as you look around. This helps with both performance and the visuals in the game. However, just like the earlier examples of integrating eye tracking into the gameplay, developers have to code this into the games. I do not have a full list of which PSVR 2 games are using dynamic foveated rendering right now, but I can say at the time of this video that Switchback VR and the Light Brigade currently do not use it. Light Brigade had DFR added on the Quest 2 version for Quest Pro users recently, but not on PSVR 2, at least not yet. Adding DFR to your games requires time and resources that some studios may not be able to afford. I'm saying all this to say that the Quest 3 had eye tracking. That doesn't mean that every single Quest 3 game will utilize it. Remember that Quest 2 is not going away. So just like with Quest 1 and when other gaming console companies release new hardware, a lot of games for the first year Quest 3's release will also be released on Quest 2. So much like PSVR 2's current library, only a handful of games would take advantage of it. Take all that in its totality, the financial cost, the resource costs, and the need for developers to utilize the tech, I can totally understand why Meta decided against it. Have I convinced you? I'd love to get your opinion down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, let me know with a like and subscribe to the channel for more Quest 3 and other VR content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.